Hey everyone, welcome to our deep dive today. We're going to be looking at this idea of strength and weakness,
hmm
specifically how God's power can really shine through when we recognize our limitations.
Yeah.
And we have some fascinating stuff to dig into. We've got some really powerful excerpts from Second Corinthians and then
hmm
also this really inspiring YouTube sermon that's on the same theme.
Yeah, such a profound concept, This whole idea that our weaknesses are not something to hide or be ashamed of, but they're actually opportunities for God to really work in our lives.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
So, okay, Second Corinthians 12:9 says, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." Like that seems kind of counterintuitive, right? We're
Yeah.
always like striving for strength and we're trying to avoid, weakness at all costs.
Oh, for sure. And I think that's where the world's definition of strength really clashes with God's definition. The world tells us to be independent, self-reliant, to have it all figured out. But what if true strength lies in actually acknowledging that we don't have it all figured out?
That's what really hit me about that YouTube video.
Yeah.
The speaker talks about real strength,
Yeah.
not being about physical power, outward success, but about the courage to rely on God even when like we feel inadequate.
Yeah, it's about recognizing that that we are finite beings, that we have limits. And instead of trying to push past those limits on our own, we can actually choose to lean on God who has no
The
limits.
video gave some really compelling examples of what that looks like,
Mm.
you know, like situations where people found strength in seemingly impossible circumstances. I was especially moved by the one with the grieving person finding solace in God's goodness.
Oh, that's a powerful one.
Yeah.
Yeah, because grief can feel so overwhelming, like it's just going to swallow you whole.
hmm
But in that moment of profound vulnerability, choosing to turn to God, to find comfort in his presence, like that takes incredible strength.
That's strength that we probably wouldn't even recognize as strength if we were looking through the world's lens.
Exactly. And the video gives another example that really resonated with me. Someone stepping out in faith uh, to pursue a calling even though they felt completely unqualified for it.
Yeah.
And that kind of courage, the willingness to trust God even when you're terrified, like that's true strength.
It makes me think of all the times I've hesitated to do something because I felt like I wasn't good enough or smart enough or experienced enough.
Right.
And what if those were actually opportunities to like tap into God's strength instead of relying solely on my own like limited abilities?
Yeah. It's a perspective shift, isn't it? Instead of seeing our limitations as obstacles, we can actually view them as invitations to experience God's power more fully. It's like saying,
Yeah.
okay, this is where my strength ends, and this is where God's strength begins.
Yeah, and that's such a liberating thought. Like it
Yeah.
takes the pressure off of us to have it all together, to be perfect.
Yeah. Because we don't have to be. Our weakness doesn't disqualify us from experiencing God's power. In fact, it's often in those moments of weakness that we're most open to receiving it.
Yeah. The video also touches on some like classic biblical examples, like
Yeah.
like David facing Goliath.
Right.
We've all heard that story a million times. But when you view it through this lens of strength and weakness, it takes on a whole new meaning.
Absolutely. David was just a shepherd boy, going up against this giant warrior.
hmm
It would have been so easy for him to focus on his own weakness, his lack of experience, his size, but instead he focused on God's power.
And he declared, the battle belongs to the Lord.
Yes.
His confidence wasn't rooted in his own abilities, but in his like unwavering faith in God. That's where his strength came from.
And it's a reminder that we don't have to face our giants alone. Whatever giants we're facing in our own lives,
Mm.
whether it's a difficult situation, a personal struggle, a seemingly impossible task, like we can draw on that same source of strength that David tapped into. We can remind ourselves that the battle belongs to the Lord.
And there's another powerful example in the video, the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and
Oh,
Abednego.
yes.
They chose to stand firm in their faith, even though they were facing a fiery furnace.
Right.
Talk about facing impossible odds.
Right. And they said, even if God doesn't deliver us, we will not bow down. Like they understood that their ultimate allegiance was to God, and they were willing to face any consequence for staying true to their beliefs.
They drew strength from a source beyond themselves,
Yes.
a strength that the world couldn't understand or extinguish.
hmm
Their story demonstrates that true strength isn't about avoiding suffering or hardship, but about remaining faithful, even in the midst of it.
Yeah, it's about knowing that even if we don't see the outcome we desire, we can trust that God is with us and that his power is working in our lives. And sometimes that means, finding strength to endure, to persevere, and to remain faithful even when it's hard.
So we've got these amazing examples from the Bible, and then the YouTube videos bringing them to life with these modern-day stories that are so relatable.
Hmm.
Like, it's really driving home the point that this concept of strength and weakness isn't just some abstract theological idea. It's a lived reality that can empower us in our, everyday lives.
Yeah, it's a truth that can transform the way we approach challenges, the way we view ourselves, and the way we experience God's presence in our lives.
Mhm.
It's about letting go of the need to be strong on our own and embracing the freedom that comes from relying on God's limitless strength.
Yeah, it really does feel like a completely different definition of strength, than
Mhm.
what we usually hear.
Absolutely. Like the world often equates strength with never showing weakness, you know, and always being in control, being invincible. But the truth is, we're human and we're going to face those challenges that just feel bigger than us.
And that's okay, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's not a sign of weakness to admit we need help.
Yeah.
It's actually, where true strength, that comes from God,
Yeah.
is where it begins to emerge.
Yeah. And there's another verse in Second Corinthians that I think really speaks to this. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses. For when I am weak, then I am strong.
I was really struck by that verse too.
Yeah.
It seems almost paradoxical. Like, how can we delight in our weaknesses? Doesn't that go against our natural desire to, like, improve ourselves and overcome those limitations?
I think it's about recognizing that our weaknesses don't define us,
Mhm.
They don't diminish our worth or make us any less loved by God.
So it's not about celebrating our weaknesses in a way that, like, keeps us stuck
Right.
or prevents us from growing.
Exactly.
It's more about, like, recognizing that our limitations are just an inherent part of the human experience.
Yeah, exactly. It's about shifting our perspective. So instead of seeing our weaknesses as something to be ashamed of or to hide, we can actually view them as opportunities for God's power to be uh, made manifest in our lives,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
So it's like saying, okay, God, I can't do this on my own.
Right.
I need your strength to help me through this.
Yeah. And that act of surrender,
Mm.
of acknowledging our need for God is so powerful, you know? It opens the door for God to work in us and through us in ways we could never imagine.
It takes the pressure off too, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because we're not trying to, like, muscle our way through life on our own.
Right.
We can just rest in the knowledge that God is with us and he's more than capable of handling, whatever comes our way.
Yeah, there's a beautiful freedom in that surrender. And it doesn't mean that we become passive or inactive. It's about partnering with God.
Right. So it's not about sitting back and waiting for God to do everything for us.
Right.
It's about taking action and making choices, pursuing our goals, but also acknowledging that dependence on God and his strength.
And as we do that, as we practice surrendering our weaknesses to God, we begin to experience a different kind of strength, a strength that isn't dependent on our circumstances or our own, fluctuating abilities.
It's a strength that comes from a deep inner knowing that we are loved, supported, and empowered by God.
Hmm.
And that knowledge allows us to face our challenges with courage, knowing that we don't have to face them alone.
I think that's what makes this concept so relevant and so powerful for us today. We live in a world that's constantly telling us to strive to achieve, to prove ourselves.
Mm.
And it's so easy to get caught up in that cycle and to start believing that our worth is tied to our accomplishments or our ability to handle everything perfectly.
Yeah.
But the message of God's strength in our weakness offers a different path, a path of freedom and grace. It invites us to let go of the pressure, to be strong on our own, and to lean into the limitless strength of God. And as we do that, we discover that true strength isn't about hiding our weaknesses. It's about embracing them, surrendering them to God, and allowing his power to shine through them.
In the YouTube video, it ends with this really powerful prayer.
Yeah.
It says, I will forever be strong in you. And it really captures this idea of ongoing dependence on God, like acknowledging that we will always have weaknesses,
Yes.
but we don't have to let them define us or limit us.
Yeah, it's a journey, isn't it? A lifelong process of learning to trust God more deeply and to rely on his strength more fully.
Yeah.
And it's a journey that's available to all of us, regardless of our past mistakes, our current struggles, or, our perceived weaknesses.
Yeah.
Because in God's eyes, our weaknesses don't disqualify us. They qualify us for his grace. And that's where true strength is found.
It really feels like we need to, like, redefine the word strength,
Yeah.
after all this.
Yeah. I think you're right. It's just so ingrained in us that strength means, you're independent, you're self-sufficient, always in control. But what if true strength is actually about about recognizing those limits and just surrendering that need to control everything.
It's humbling, isn't it?
It is. But
Yeah.
there's such a profound freedom in that humility, because when we let go of that need to be perfect, to have all the answers, to be strong all the time, it's like we open ourselves up to this whole new level of strength, the strength that comes from God.
And it's not dependent on, what's happening around us or even how we're feeling that day. It's
Hmm.
just always there.
Yeah, it's like having this well, this endless well of strength we can draw from any time.
Hmm.
And the amazing thing is, the more we acknowledge our weakness, the more we lean into God's strength, the more accessible that well becomes.
Like a muscle.
Yeah.
They get stronger.
Yeah.
The more you use it, the more we practice surrendering to God, the easier it becomes to trust him, to rely on him.
I love that. I think that's such a powerful way to think about it. And as we cultivate that habit of surrender, you start to see this shift in our lives, Like we become less fearful, less anxious, just less weighed down by everything.
Because you know that deep down you're not carrying those burdens alone.
Right.
You have God's strength.
It makes me think of that verse in Matthew. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Like, it's just this invitation to let go of our need to be in control, to strive, to just rest.
In that place of rest, that's where we find that true strength,
Yeah.
the strength to deal with whatever's going on, to overcome those obstacles,
Yeah.
to live a life that really has meaning.
So if you're listening to this and you're feeling weak, discouraged, overwhelmed, I want to encourage you to really embrace those feelings. Don't hide them or pretend they're not there.
Yeah.
Bring them to God. Surrender.
Because in those moments, that's when you discover that his power is made perfect,
Mm-hmm.
in your weakness.
I'd love to leave you with a question to think about this week. What is one area in your life where you can choose to surrender, to rely on God's strength instead?
Yeah. Maybe something you're going through. Maybe it's a tough relationship or just a struggle you're dealing with. Whatever it is, remember, you don't have to go through it alone. God is there. His strength is available. And he's waiting for you to ask.
Thanks for joining us today. It's been awesome to explore all this with you, and I hope you really experience God's strength in your own life.
Until next time, remember, in our weakness, God's power is made perfect.